Hello and welcome, everybody out there, to another episode of Coaching from the Heart with your co hosts, as always, myself, Tyler Thurman, and my good friend, colleague, and fellow show host, Harold Fedderson.
Hey, Tyler.
Hey, Harold, it's great to be with you again today, as we are most Thursdays. So today's topic for coaching from the heart is the surrender conversation. So we're going to be talking for the whole show about surrender. But before we jump into that, I want to just point people in the direction of our websites and contact information. So Harold and I are both transformative coaches. We work with people one on one and in groups to guide them through sort of a spiritual journey, back to themselves. So if you're interested in that kind of work, feel free to reach out to myself. Again, Tyler Thurman. You can reach me at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. And you can find all my contact information there. And Harold, how can people out in the internet find you?
There are a couple of spots. So my blog is hearttohand.wordpress.com, and my Facebook page is The Awakening Heart.
Hmm, fantastic. I love that title too, The Awakening Heart.
Yeah, I do like that one as well.
Yeah, it really speaks to the essence of at least my experience of who you are and who the work that you do with people, which is fantastic.
And
So,
that,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, sorry. Yeah, just how, I searched for a long time for a title, but what I love about The Awakening Heart is it's like this continuous unfolding. It's like this always thing that always is happening,
Hmm,
as opposed to something like you just flick a light switch and then all of a sudden, there we go, we've got light eternally. It's this
right.
constant process of awakening more and more and more.
Yeah, it's a sort of unfolding, if you will, that I think really speaks to the nature of our show too, right? Which is, pretty much what we talk about every week is some kind of something to do with awakening to who we really are, right? Which is going to be, front and center for our conversation again today, I'm sure. So today's topic that we chose together was surrender, and just to kind of set the table, surrenders. It's one of those words that it goes deep. Right? There's a lot we can talk about it, but it's one of those words that we don't always think too deeply about, and we all, as a culture, as kind of a world culture, we can say, oh, surrender, that's a good thing, right? Kind of in a spiritual circles, right? Maybe not in military circles, but in a spiritual context, right? Or maybe a self-development or self-improvement, all this whole world that we live in. um, Surrender, we say, oh yeah, surrender is a good thing, and everybody probably will nod their heads in agreement. But it's also one of those things that we really, first of all, we don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. We don't know what we're surrendering to. We don't know what we're surrendering from. Um,
We don't know what we're surrendering.
yeah, we don't know what we're surrendering. Um, so it's just, I think our understanding of it doesn't go very deep, which is one of the reasons we both wanted to have this conversation, I think. And but I'll just kind of share with, for me, where I start with my understanding of surrendering, and then I'll toss it over to you. So when I think about surrender in and again, we're going to be focusing mainly in kind of a spiritual context here for the show. But when I think in terms of surrender, I think my experience of life, I am I'm usually doing one of two things, right? I am fighting what is, or I'm not. And and I mean that on the level of the mind, right? So with my own thinking, and it can be conscious or unconscious, I am at odds with something, or I'm at peace. It's kind in that sense, it is kind of like flipping a switch, right? Those, obviously you're going to be somewhere on the spectrum of that. Um, so in the context of surrender, really, we are at war in our minds a lot of the time, and that manifests in a bunch of different ways, right? It could be, and these aren't bad things. It's just experiences that we have. So it could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be resentment, it could be depression. Uh, it could be all those internal experiences that aren't peace and love in the purest sense. That they just feel heavy and it could be, like stressful. There's a sense of irritation that comes with all of them. And it's going on a lot of the time for a lot of people, including myself. Not for me as much as it used to, but it still takes place where there's something going on in my life, and then I inexplicably I do something with my mind that I'm not aware that I'm doing it, right? But it's taking place. I am saying whatever's taking place, this is not okay. This is a bad thing. So I push against it, right? I push against what is. And the problem with pushing against what is it's like pushing against a brick wall, right? Um, now, sometimes we can over time change things in the world, right? But on the level of the mind, it's a little bit different. It's interesting, um, because those are kind of two separate things that we can talk about later in the conversation. But my just to kind of sum up, my understanding of surrender is really recognizing when I'm experiencing any of those experiences of misery and suffering on the inside, I recognize that's there because I am pushing against, with my mental energy, what is. And I can surrender my own attack on what is. So when I think about surrendering, that's kind of what's on my mind, and my understanding of it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, Harold.
Well, I
And
think they're.
how maybe that's a little bit different from mine.
It's funny because I was just going to say it's very similar. um, so there's the time when when we experience just being in the flow of life, like we're just going with the flow, so to speak, and whether things are uh, good or not so good, whatever, we're just kind of flowing with it. And then there's the time when the flow is happening, as the flow is always happening, and some aspect of us starts to formulate itself and come up with ideas that things should be different.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's sorry, that's good.
No,
So,
I love that idea of us. I wonder if you could elaborate on that. That starts to.
um, yeah, so the whole mental structure that we often associate or identify ourselves with, that has, opinions and judgments and attachment to those. Well, actually, it's just the attachment actually to those that causes the the rift. Currently, my language, I like to say, is the phrase causes that friction. So there's the flow of life. So life is flowing as life does. You are part of the flow of life. Um, and then there comes something where it just starts like a little germination of something, a coagulation of some thought structure, and all of a sudden you're in a place where okay, this isn't how things should be. If I was in charge,
Yeah.
things would be like this. So it's only when the coagulation of that sort of thought structure or the attachment levels get to a certain point that the surrender even needs to come into the picture. Because
Mm.
prior to that, you were just in the flow, and there's surrender doesn't even show up at all when you're just in the flow of life,
Yeah, it's only
right?
relevant once we've taken on that attack, essentially, or those
Yeah,
judgments or that thoughts. Right. I love the word coagulation that you use. That really brings some mental imagery there. Like, oh, it's solidifying. It's
yeah. It's coming
becoming.
into,
It's seeming
yeah,
to be more and more real. Is
yeah.
kind of comes to my mind when I think about that. And then it at least in my experience, we mistake it for something solid when in
hmm
actuality it's not.
And then we begin to fight for it,
Yeah,
or it,
yeah.
it
This is
begins to
a
fight for
this.
itself.
So in other words, like the situation that I'm pushing against is it's in actuality, outside my mind, it's actually a bad thing. It's actually not okay. That judgment that I've placed upon it, it looks less and less like a judgment and just a thought, and more like a fact of the world outside our minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it gets really confusing because once we're there, then we're in this battle of where it looks like we're fighting real monsters or real problems or real world issues. Now,
hmm
that's not to say things can't present themselves outside us that aren't worth addressing, but this is going to be controversial. But I'm going to say it because it's in my experience I've never found anything that contradicts it. There are things that seem to contradict it until we look at them. But what I'm going to say is, are those unpleasant experiences of life, those that stress, that sense of battling the world, um, you know, all those things I listed in the beginning, stress and upset and misery and depression, and those are all, again, they're not bad. That would be a judgment, right? That would be me pushing against them. They are all a result of internal conflict, internal friction, as you said, Harold. They're they're it's an inside manifestation that gets projected out onto the world, but it always starts from within, but it doesn't always look like it started there because oftentimes we come to it once it's coagulated into form, and we're like, oh, there's this real thing out here. We weren't conscious of it in its formulation, and so it's very um, it's hard to see sometimes. It's hard to recognize it for what it really is.
Yeah, take like when I distilled it down to a thing, but there's so it happens for most people. It happens so fast where you go from being in the flow to saying this is ridiculous. It shouldn't be this way. That happens so fast
Right.
that we don't even notice. We might not even notice that we're fighting against life in our heads until like way down the road. But if you open the space between those two, you will find that that's what's happening is there's this coagulation that happens. So I don't know why this is coming to mind, but I have an example of this.
Right.
So let's say you're in traffic and the traffic is particularly log jammed. Um, so if you're just in the flow of the traffic jam, however slow that is, or appearing to be not moving at all, if
Right.
you're if you're just in it, it's just like this is life. This is life right now. This is life moving through the world. And then something happens, the coagulation happens, and then eventually you're like, what is taking so long? Like, why is this so slow today? And and then we've got it's burst, right?
Right.
And then where it goes from there, maybe we start getting angry, honk at people, or get flipping the bird or whatever. Um, and then we start fighting against, the people who created the structure, and like the city should have this under control, and it just becomes this very large thing. Whereas at the beginning of it, uh, in our theoretical example, we were just in the flow of it. We were just in the flow of it.
Hmm.
And I like what you said, where it's like it doesn't mean we don't change anything. In that moment, you're not going to change the traffic by being in resistance to it. Uh, but we could then take that on and use our minds, which are genius at coming up with solutions to traffic movements and such. And you could get hired by the city and create a totally different flow, and all of a sudden there's never this slow traffic again in that city ever again. That's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about
Yeah. Yeah.
is that movement where we go from being in the flow to all of a sudden not. We're now living from the coagulated attachment to our opinions about how things should be and how they should be different than they really are.
Right. Right. And I think it's worth pointing out kind of what you mean by flow, right? So Harold's not saying I'm literally in the flow of traffic, right? He's saying the flow of life, not in physical form, although it can take a physical form, although it will be non-specific. It could be something different every time when you're in the flow. What Harold's pointing to is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but is a uh, an an awakening and an alertness, a connection to the essence behind life, the essence of who we are, to kind of going back to our source. Um, that really, I think we talked about this quite a bit in our conversation about love, um, where we are essentially made of love. We are made of peace. Like it is the essence and the foundation of who we are, and then all this stuff gets piled on top of that. Really, the flow is just the truth of us, and um, everything else is just noise, essentially. But it's not noise imposed on us by the world. I think that's the hard part to kind of wrap our minds around, or at least to accept, right? Because the world largely believes in what I consider the greatest myth in Western civilization, which is it's an outside in world. The things that happen circumstantially outside our minds are causal to our experience of life, as opposed to my experience of the truth, which is it's the other way around. That our experience of life, of love, of happiness gets created from within and then gets projected out onto the world. And then we confuse it. Um, so it's an inside out conversation. So when we're talking about um, this, so you used the example of traffic, right? And I love it because it's too full. This illustrates it very simply because on one level there's the traffic, but on the level of the mind there's our resistance to the traffic, which we have created for ourselves with our own thinking and our own minds. Um, we think it's the traffic that's the problem. It's not. That's the deceptive part of this whole conversation, and really it's a part of a bigger conversation. But what is a problem is the problem we ourselves have created in our mind around the traffic. So, and then you mentioned like, oh, we could actually, from a place of peace and love and ease, we could probably pretty easily come up with some creative solutions to maybe influence the flow of traffic, affect it in some way, make it better, um, make people's commutes more enjoyable. You can come up with all sorts of stuff, but uh, that is missing the point a little bit, right? Which I think you pointed to. You said this isn't what we're really talking about. It's yeah, we can do that, and I would never discourage anybody from doing that sort of thing if it appeals to you. But do it with the full knowledge that solving the traffic buildup won't solve your misery of mind. Right? It won't get to the heart of your upset, your stress, your suffering. That's a that's where surrender comes in. Right? We're not You don't have to surrender to traffic necessarily, but you surrender to everything we've created around traffic. And that seems like such a silly example, but it's relevant to people. So yeah, you
Happens
have
on a daily basis.
yeah, it's something it's easy to see because we experience it all the time.
Hmm.
I certainly know I do.
Yeah, and it's trying to solve the traffic issue is interesting. Interesting too, because I mean, we can solve the traffic issue with the intention of not having the slow traffic again, so as to stop our suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if the traffic never flows that slow again, you will never have that kind of suffering in the same space. Or we could also approach it from a place of love, where we want the traffic to flow more naturally, let's say, at a more natural pace in accordance with the movement of the city or what have you.
Mm.
So we can, at the back end of it, we can quote unquote solve the traffic issue from different places. However, we still have the thing. we still have the we still have the coagulation.
The upset, the judgment, the yeah
It
that thing that slows that flow, like you were saying.
Yeah, because I think from the experience of it, um, I actually am talking about being in the flow of traffic.
Hmm.
It's like if you were standing in the rain and it's raining a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's raining a lot. Are you still in the same flow of being in the rain, or is it like, oh man, now it's pouring? It's ridiculous. Uh, whereas when it was sprinkling, you're like, oh, look at the pretty rainbows. This is so beautiful. It happens everywhere all the time, where
Absolutely.
we're just in the flow, and then the coagulation happens, and then we're in the resistance and the separation and the argument against life, like, or God or whatever. That this shouldn't be this way. That person shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be doing whatever that is they're doing. They should be doing what I think they should be doing, because then their life would be better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there we are. We're in that conversation inside of ourselves.
Yeah. No, I love the way you put that. That what comes to mind is just um, it's like wading out into a powerful river, right? And just like this is both physical and metaphorical, right? You
Yeah.
and then turning upstream and saying, "Dang, this river, it really needs to not be flowing as hard because it's making life hard on me."
It's going to sweep me
this
away.
is this is really difficult to go upstream here. I mean, this river is causing me a lot of problems in my life because I just can't travel up it quickly enough. And you know, it's uh, it's not the river. The river's doing what it knows how to do. It flows, um, we push. We turn upstream, or we get a nice little raft and we ride it where it takes us. And now, just kind of bringing it back to the conversation of surrender. Um, to me, that word engenders sort of a fight or a battle or war, um, and kind of giving up on the war, saying I I'm not going to participate in this anymore. Um, now, we often use it in a derogatory sense, like you've given up, which means you've lost, which means you suck. So, right? You're the loser. You've lost something meaningful. But in this context, it's a bit different because what we don't realize is we are the ones who have taken up arms against the world, against what is, against the river, right? Against traffic, against whatever is presenting itself as a problem in your life right now. And it could be many things. In order to get to a place where surrender is even relevant, we first have to realize that we are the ones doing the attacking.
We have to be able to see that the traffic is just flowing as the traffic is.
Yeah. Because if we're an innocent victim in all of this, if the river's doing this to me, oh no, the traffic is doing this to me. It's making me miserable. It's making me depressed. It's making me feel
Late.
awful. It's making, well, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that is a bit more logistical, right? That's not as much of a judgment. Now we have all of these connotations about being late, all these judgments and thoughts about that. But if you look at it in pure sense, being late is just a logistical thing. Oh, I didn't make it on. I didn't make it when I said I was going to make it, or I didn't make it when I was, you know, when my contract says I'm supposed to be at work. Now you can make up a bunch of stuff about being late that makes you feel awful, but being late in and of itself isn't actually a problem. Now I'm not saying be late. That's please don't hear it as that, right? And I think you know I'm not saying that, Harold, but to all the you out there who think that's what I'm saying, I'm just saying being late or being stuck in traffic or having something happen to you that you judge as not great or bad, that's not the source of your that disruption of the flow of life. That thing out there that's going on, it's not the cause. It looks like it is because our minds project. They're projectors, essentially. Um, but if you turn your eyes inward and you begin to look within, you'll see this need not be. There's a lesson in the Course in Miracles that it's really simple. The title is "I could see peace instead of this." You could say I could experience peace instead of this. I could be peace instead of this. Whatever it is you're feeling other than peace or love or ease or flow. I like that term flow for this conversation. Um, whatever it is you're experiencing other than that, that need not be because it's self created. Now, that's not a blame thing, right? That's not meant to be like, oh, I'm doing this to myself. I'm such a horrible person. Whack, whack, whack. All I'm pointing to is descriptively where it's getting created is with us. We've taken up arms against what is with our minds, and it's causes us a great deal of suffering.
I think I think your quote there is useful in bridging now the gap back.
Mm.
So, in the way we've framed this, or I should take responsibility for this, I guess, in the way I framed it, where we're in the flow, and then the coagulation begins, and then we're in some form of resistance, um, and then only at that point then does surrender become a valuable practice. Yeah, because when we're in the flow, we don't need to surrender because there's no us in the world. It's just we're in the flow.
Yeah.
So I think um, a bridge back to the flow uh, is in that quote. So we go. So the more selfish and attached we are to our resistance to the traffic, the more it shouldn't be this way, or I'm going to be late, or this is making me angry. The more selfish it is, the sort of more visceral and real it becomes. So one step back towards one initial act of surrender could be to just ask yourself to find some gentle reason for the traffic. So say, well, maybe someone, got hit by a car. Maybe a cyclist or a child or a
Mm.
elderly person was crossing the road, and then all of a sudden there's a softening. You know, we're still, don't get me wrong, we're still inside of the coagulation, but we've softened it just by reframing it for ourselves. So we can reframe it in a quote unquote positive, right? Like people always say, just look at the positive sides of things, and that that is a different conversation. But in the sense of what we're talking about with surrender, that can be one of the steps to lead us back. So we go from that really hard sort of gritty resistance into a softer form of resistance or near acceptance, if you will. Um, and
Right.
then I think it's easier then to just surrender from that place back into the flow. Like this is just, and I'm not talking about like just saying like this is how it is, because that's still you in your head talking. There's still a you and life happening, right? There's still the gap between you as a coagulated thing and life itself, where
Yeah.
you are the traffic flow. Like you are the slow traffic.
Yeah. I really like how you talked about that because uh, it is important to not stop at the reframe, right? Not as a doing, but as an understanding, as a seeing, as an awakening. Um, but it's true. It's what what a reframe or a change in perception is really all that means, right? Which is a change in thinking. um, what what that points us towards is a deeper truth. When we see this isn't as solid as I at first glance it looked like it was, right? It's not as coagulated or as solidified. It's not as factual that this is this awful thing. Like the very fact that you could have a change of thinking about it and then have a different experience about it, like you said, maybe um, somebody's loved one was in trouble and they got in an accident on their way to try to help them, or something like that. Whether that's the truth or not, right, is sort of irrelevant. But the fact that we could have a different experience of the facts outside means our experience was never coming from there in the first place. And it, like you said, it softens the hold, the stranglehold that we have on our attachment to being right about our judgments. Um, because oh boy, do we have do we have an attachment to that, right? A hold over that.
And it's interesting because if you keep the hold and then keep tightening it, let's say we're going to work in this example, then you get to work and all of a sudden you're like, oh, the freaking traffic was ridiculous. Like it was horrible out there. And then you start telling people about how the traffic in this place is so terrible and it shouldn't be this way. And then other people, it enlivens their coagulation. And often you'll find people will be like, exactly. Like, when is the city going to do something about this? And then it just continues to strengthen and build.
Hmm.
And it becomes this total fortress of denial of what is real, which is there was this flow and it was slower than it was yesterday or what have you.
Right.
So if we can catch ourselves in that place of resistance, then we can soften it. And then let's pretend in this example we softened it by opening our hearts to the possibility that someone's child uh, is injured possibly. And like you said, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be fact. None of it's fact. We have no idea. All we know is that we want it to be different, we want it to be faster. But if we choose that softening and that surrender,
Yeah.
then when we get to work, who now do we get to be at work? Who were we going to be at work if we kept clenching tighter and tighter? We'd end up as this angry, ragey person at work, and then, what are we going to do with our whole workplace? All of a sudden, we change the energy of that. So if we show up more from that place of gentleness, then we're actually bringing a form of human love into the workplace. Or it's like, oh, this form of compassion, this form of someone may have been injured. I don't know. Um,
Mm.
and then if we get all the way back to flow, we are the flow of life at work. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to point to something about flow and um, the essence of life itself, kind of the spiritual essence. Um, it's surrender more than anything is a non-doing, right? It's a letting go. It's a relinquishment. It's because it can sound very effortful, right? Which is usually just a great way to get yourself even further stuck.
Because it can feel effortful, right? When it's like, no, no, this should be faster. This
Yeah.
traffic should be faster. Like, so it can seem like a lot of work just at that first bit.
Yeah, and what we're experiencing there is we're experiencing resistance to the truth. Essentially, we're experiencing resistance to our attachment to our victimhood, right? We talked about before our first and second and third helpings of righteous indignation, right? Self-righteousness. We what we get out of our misery and disrupting the flow and the peace and the love behind life. What we get out of that is we get to say, it's not on me, right? We get to say, it's that person over there, it's that traffic over there, it's that, it could be that virus, it could be that weather, it could be anything um, that we think is a problem. What we get out of it is that sense of self-righteousness, that sense of victimhood, that sense of, in a sense, it's my innocence, right? I'm innocent of fault here. I'm innocent of responsibility. I'm not the guilty party. And anyone, if they really want to have an honest conversation with themselves, they can get in touch with the part of themselves that loves that or I think lust is maybe a better word. We lust for that sense of righteousness and victimhood and innocence, if you will. And it's really worth looking at that and seeing what you're giving up to have that, because there's a resistance there, obviously, which is what we're just talking about. But you can soften that resistance by looking at it and seeing, this is what I've given up to have this. And to put it bluntly, you've given up the peace and the love of God so that you get to be right and you get to be innocent of wrongdoing. And
You get to be the winner.
you get to be the winner. But we don't see what we've traded there. And if you can begin to see that a little bit, there will begin to be less resistance. And really all surrender ends up being is, let's say you're in the river, right? And let's say you're in a canoe. You're paddling up the river, you're paddling up the river. The light comes on. Why am I paddling up the river? Maybe I could just stop and it would be easier. And um, and the flow of the river will course correct you. The flow of life, of peace, of love, of our very nature will turn our boat around if we let it. That's what surrender is. Surrender is not, I need to bring peace and love to this. I need to create this. It's, I need to give up what I've been. I need to let go of the oars, essentially, which is my judgments and my assessments of everything that's wrong with the world and that's wrong with my life. Now I don't need to give those up, but if I give them up, I get to float down the river. I get to return to the natural flow of who I am. So it's not this like you said, it can seem like this effortful thing, but only in the sense that we really don't want to let go of those oars. We really don't want to be found out as the source of our own misery. Now, that again, that's not a fault or a blame thing. It's just a seeing, it's just an understanding. It gets created from within. And on some level that I'm not aware of right now, I get to choose. It's a choice between going with the flow of life or pushing against it. That's really all there is. And we're so accustomed to pushing against it that we don't know what the other option is and how beautiful and wonderful life can be from that place of going with the flow. It sounds so cliche, but
And
I don't
sometimes
I
we
I don't mean it in that sense. Yeah, go ahead.
and sometimes we want to hang on to our resistance.
Sure,
Sometimes we want to be right about the traffic, and that's okay too.
that is
Because
okay too.
because if we don't honor that, then all of a sudden we have two selves in this argument against life. One that says, no, this traffic shouldn't be this way, and one that says, well, you shouldn't actually feel that way. And then inside of this made up, coagulated thing, we actually now have divided it so it can fight against itself.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and then
So,
guess what? The war continues,
yeah, and then they battle each other,
or the
you
battle.
know.
Yeah, the battle continues.
Yeah. So if what you want is to be right about the traffic shouldn't be this way, then just honor that. Just live that out until the energy of what's behind it dies away, because it's not um, sustainable in any real way. It's like a fire that constantly has to be refueled.
Mm,
So just let it be. Just let that burn itself. It's like emotions. Just let them empty themselves.
yeah.
Otherwise, you're creating this battle, and then you're stuck in that, like what is this, like getting inside of the matrix, and then you're stuck inside the matrix or something. um
Yeah, I am glad you brought that up because we really, really can. We can create a battle against the ego, those judgments, which is just more of the same, right?
Masquerading
It's
as
masquerading.
some
Yeah, oh, I love that. I love that terminology. That's
some
beautiful.
divine wisdom, you
It's an
know
illusion, right? It's smoke and mirrors, but it's like, oh, this spiritual self is doing battle with this. No, it's all the ego.
yeah,
So yeah,
the whole thing is the same coagulated.
it's this whole facade, right? But but also at the same time, the more you see, again, this isn't a doing, this is just kind of how it ends up showing up for most people. The more you see, truly see, not intellectually, but kind of on a deep heart level, um, the more you see this is some kind of a choice on my part to be miserable, to be right, to have that feeling, the easier it becomes over time to surrender, to let go, to relinquish the reins, if you will. Um, Again, like you said, Harold, and I love that you said it. It's not bad. It's not wrong to push against life. It's just all we're showing you is here's how it occurs. We create that for ourselves by pushing against the flow of life, by pushing against what is, or we can let it go and experience the peace and the love of life or of God or of spirit.
I think the thing that's often missed is that um, the flow of life. It's um, like even that saying, go with the flow. Even in that saying,
Right.
there's almost two things. There's a you, and then there's the flow, and then you're going with it.
Mm,
And it's just that's not true either.
right.
You you are the flow of life.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
are the movement of this whole cosmic thing. Like you are it all the time, forever. And it's only when that little coagulation happens, and then we are in that sort of um, mush, uh, that we're no longer experiencing the truth of what we are, experiencing the truth of the whole deal.
Right. Right. Yeah. One of my favorite. I'm gonna butcher this, but I'm gonna go ahead anyways because I don't remember the details very well. But one of my favorite um, illustrations of that is we are the ocean, and then the ocean has like this tumbling wave, right? And some droplets of water separate themselves momentarily, and they want to say, I'm, they sort of develop this separate sense of separateness from the ocean. So I'm not the ocean. I'm different from the ocean. I'm you know in my case it's I'm Tyler, right? I'm this separate person that had like you talked about this in the very beginning of this conversation, um, that that sense of us starts to formulate, and it all steamrolls from there. It's but that's not the truth of who we are. We're the ocean, we're the flow, we're the peace and the love of God. We are that essence behind life. And this idea, the self-concept that we have, it's made up. It's not real. It's not bad, but it does when we're in that, and we're always going to be in and out of it, but we're in that, investing in that, thinking that's us, that is turning upriver. It doesn't do anything to the river, right? It just is saying, wait, I'm not the river. I'm going to go upriver. Um, but really, it's all an illusion. It's anytime we're experiencing anything other than the flow of life, it's not true. Now we'll experience it as true, uh, as separate, seemingly separate people, separate personalities. But in the grandest sense of what's true, that's an illusion, right? That's a what did you say? It's a disguise, or it's a you said something like that, which I loved.
I think it was disguise. We'll have to rewatch that part.
A facade.
Facade.
The Wizard of Oz. Is, that's actually one of my favorite illustrations of an illusion, right?
Mm.
The old Wizard of Oz is, if I remember right, he presents himself. He's got this curtain, right? This projector, projects different images. I think it's like a disembodied head and a fairy another time, and he appears as a few different things. But really, he's just this sleazy con man from the Midwest. And people think he's this great and powerful mystical being, right? That's what our ego is. That's what our personality is. That's the us who we think we are, that we identify with, the us that hates traffic, the us that hates our jobs, the us that gets angry at the world. That's not true. It's not real. It's not the truth of who we are. And and there's nothing in particular to be done about that. It's just worth exploring that idea that it's an inside out job, and on some level, again, that I'm not aware of right now, I get to choose. I'm a decision making mind. And I forgot that I chose misery instead of peace. What do you think, Harold?
Um, as my final, uh, what do you like to say, parting shots?
That's right.
Um, the surrender is even outside of the mind. Like it's when we say, we have, because we do have a choice. We can choose in that moment to look at the positive side of it or the negative side of it, but we have to abandon the mind in order to return to the flow, because the mind is part of the coagulation.
In the sense, and I think we just have different definitions of mind, right?
Oh yeah,
When I talk about
I,
mind, I'm basically talking about God.
yeah, I do. I forget that all the time.
Yeah, yeah. The
We
the
do have
big the
different
big
definitions.
the big mind. Now there is a lowercase mind that I think is similar to what you're using. That term is kind of our individual minds, our personal minds. Yeah, absolutely. It goes beyond the personal. It goes beyond that sort of superficial um, change in perception. That reframing is really a pretty accurate um, term for it, and it goes deeper than that to the the truth behind life, right? But it is an abandoning of that. But I do like what you said about it, is in that it can be helpful to start there. Just don't stop there. All right, Harold. So I think I really enjoyed this conversation. I think that's a great place to kind of wrap it up. Um, and as always, if you enjoyed this conversation between Harold and I know I always do. Um, Again, Harold and I, we do this professionally. We work with people. We as best we can, as best we know how, from our places of love and peace. We take people. We sh- we guide people back towards who they really are too. Um, and if you're interested in taking that journey with either one of us, you can find me, Tyler Thurman, at www.coachtylerthurman. That's TYLERTHURMAN.blogspot.com, and you can find all my contact information there. And I look forward to hearing from you. And Harold, how can folks find you?
On my blog, you can subscribe to my blog, which is hearttohand.wordpress.com, or you can like my Facebook page, The Awakening Heart.
Fantastic. And that people can find your email and stuff on those.
They can find me some way through those. Yep.
Fantastic. They can reach out to you, in other
Yep.
words. Fantastic. All right. So this concludes another episode of Coaching from the Heart. Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate all you guys that watch our show, and we look forward to speaking with you next time. So, with all the love in the world, take care.